The marble corridors of Washington hum quietly beneath the soft overhead light. Inside the Treasury building, a sense of cautious relief lingers. For months, the relationship between the United States and China has been stretched taut, caught between tariffs, technology bans, and diplomatic flare-ups. But this morning, there is a different tone. Standing before a cluster of cameras and reporters at the White House, US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent adjusts the microphone and delivers a line that ripples across the markets. "I think things have calmed down. I hope China will show the respect we've shown them." It is a short statement, but one loaded with meaning. The tension that had flared over Beijing's announcement of tighter controls on rare earth exports now appears to be easing, and for Washington, this marks a welcome pause in a season of economic brinkmanship. Rare earths, the hidden metals that make modern life possible, from electric vehicles to fighter jets, from smartphones to satellites, these 17 elements sit at the heart of global industry. China controls more than 2/3 of the world's supply. When Beijing hinted at restrictions, the shockwaves travelled fast. Markets wobbled, manufacturers panicked, and officials in Washington scrambled for contingency plans. For Scott Bessent, the newly minted Treasury chief and one of the most influential voices in Trump's second administration, managing that shock became a test of strategy and diplomacy. In the weeks following Beijing's announcement, his team worked closely with allies from Tokyo to Brussels to secure alternative sources of supply. Behind closed doors, quiet calls went out to mining executives in Australia, Greenland, and Canada. The message was simple: diversify fast. Yet the tone today is notably less defensive. Trade tensions with China have eased, Bessent tells reporters, his voice even, deliberate. The cameras click in rapid bursts as he nods once and steps away from the podium. Outside, the autumn air in Washington feels crisp, almost cleansing. On the steps of the West Wing, aides whisper into phones, briefing networks and financial desks. The Dow ticks upward, Asian markets begin to steady. For investors and policymakers alike, the statement is a signal, one that the world's two largest economies may be stepping back from the edge of another trade war. The backdrop to this moment stretches back years. When Donald Trump returned to the White House in January 2025, he did so on a promise to restore America's industrial power. The Made in America slogan had become not just a campaign line, but a governing doctrine. Tariffs were reimposed on select Chinese goods, US semiconductor companies were pressed to relocate production, and allies were told to align their supply chains.
I think that things have de-escalated. We hope that China will show the respect that we have shown them, and I am confident that President Trump, because of his relationship with President Xi, will be able to get things back on a good course.
China responded with its own arsenal of measures, tightening export permits for rare earths, launching new subsidies for domestic chip makers, and warning of retaliation against what it called economic containment. By late summer, the tension had reached a boiling point. Washington accused Beijing of weaponizing critical minerals. Beijing accused Washington of hypocrisy and aggression. Commentators called it the quietest trade war in history, fought not with tariffs or tweets, but with the minerals that power the modern world. Today, that quiet war appears to have found a truce. At the Treasury, aides describe Bessent's approach as pragmatic. A financier by training and a Trump loyalist by conviction, he combines fiscal discipline with political instincts. In internal meetings, officials say he argued against escalating rhetoric and instead urged for what he called strategic derisking, not decoupling, just diversification. In Beijing, meanwhile, officials at the Ministry of Commerce struck a similarly cautious tone. State media outlets have begun referring to constructive dialogue with Washington. There are reports that new communication channels between the two sides, including a joint working group on critical minerals, are being revived. For American manufacturers, particularly in the electric vehicle and defense sectors, the easing of tension offers breathing space. In Detroit, executives at EV battery plants have already begun recalibrating their forecasts. Any sign of stability helps. One industry analyst says, "You can't build a green economy if your supply chain is on fire." Across the Pacific, the response is equally measured. Chinese officials say they remain committed to ensuring fair trade and global market stability. even as they defend their right to regulate exports for environmental and security reasons. For months, the rare earth debate has served as a proxy for something larger, a struggle for technological dominance in a world that is rapidly rewiring itself. From 5G infrastructure to artificial intelligence chips, every industry now depends on materials whose supply lines run through geopolitics. And that is why Bessent's comment carries more weight than it seems. "I hope China will show the respect we've shown them," he said, an olive branch wrapped in the language of parity. At the White House, the reaction is careful. Officials emphasize that Washington's stance remains firm. The US will continue to defend its economic interests. But behind the scenes, there is recognition that stability, even temporary, is better than confrontation. Outside financial circles, the issue may sound abstract, but for farmers, small businesses and consumers, the stakes are real. When trade wars flare, prices rise, supply chains fracture, and economies slow. The last major trade conflict between Washington and Beijing in 2018 and 2019 cost the global economy an estimated $700 billion. Nobody wants a repeat. That memory still lingers in Washington's collective consciousness. And perhaps that is why the mood, though cautious, leans toward relief. Inside the Oval Office, Trump is said to have praised Bessent's handling of the situation. One aide described the president as pleased that the secretary kept things calm. For Trump, the optics of victory matter, the image of a steady hand, a deal maker who can tame volatility. In Beijing, state television frames the story differently. Commentators there credit China's firm but rational response for what they describe as a return to balance. Yet even in that framing, there is a tacit acknowledgement that confrontation is costly and that diplomacy still has its uses. As global trade recalibrates, the rare earth issue remains a reminder of the delicate interdependence between rivals. Washington needs Chinese supply chains. China needs global markets. Each side wants leverage. Neither can afford collapse. Back in Washington, reporters pressed Bessent's team for details. What prompted the shift? Were there behind-the-scenes talks? Did Beijing make concessions? The Treasury spokesperson smiles politely and says only that dialogue remains ongoing. In the world of international economics, such ambiguity is often deliberate, a signal to markets without committing to specifics. Meanwhile, the Biden-era tariffs that Trump had partially rolled back earlier in the year are now under review again. Some may stay, others could be replaced by targeted incentives for domestic industries. The broader goal remains clear: to reduce reliance on China without igniting open hostility. Around the world, reactions are mixed. In Brussels, EU trade officials cautiously welcome the news. De-escalation between Washington and Beijing is good for everyone, says one European diplomat, but we've seen temporary truces before. In Tokyo and Seoul, governments see opportunity. Both countries are expanding their rare earth processing capabilities, hoping to serve as reliable alternatives to China's dominance. Japan's trading houses have quietly increased stakes in Australian mining projects, while South Korea's state-backed consortiums are investing in refining technology. Even in Africa, where much of the world's untapped mineral wealth lies, the mood is shifting. Leaders in Tanzania, Namibia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo are courting investment, promising to build transparent, sustainable supply chains. For the Global South, the US-China dynamic offers both risk and leverage. As one African minister recently told reporters, when elephants fight, the grass suffers. But when they negotiate, the grass can grow. Back in the US, the domestic political dimension of trade remains potent. Lawmakers from industrial states are already framing Bessent's announcement as proof that Trump's hardline tactics have paid off. Critics, meanwhile, warn that easing tensions too quickly could invite complacency. Yet even those critics admit, for now, calm is better than chaos. The visual of today's briefing, a confident Treasury Secretary, a composed White House, and a market breathing a little easier, will travel far. It will appear on evening broadcasts in Asia, in economic roundtables in Europe, and in investor bulletins worldwide. Because in geopolitics, perception shapes reality. When Bessent said things have calmed down, he wasn't just describing the markets. He was signaling to both sides, Washington and Beijing, that a pause is possible, that not every disagreement must spiral into crisis. That signal matters. It suggests that even in an era defined by competition, diplomacy still holds a place at the table. By nightfall, the story has spread across global news wires. Trade tensions with China have eased, US Treasury Secretary says. A simple headline, but behind it, the machinery of global economics grinds into a slightly smoother rhythm. In the coming days, officials from both countries are expected to meet quietly in Geneva under the auspices of the World Trade Organization. Sources say the agenda will include export licensing, environmental compliance, and rare earth recycling, technical issues that mask strategic intent. For journalists covering this beat, the rhythm of the story mirrors the pulse of diplomacy itself. Tension, pause, recalibration. Each statement, each quote becomes a marker of where the balance stands. For Scott Bessent, today's moment may be only one chapter in a larger narrative, the redefinition of America's economic engagement with the world under Trump's renewed presidency. But for the millions whose livelihoods depend on stable prices, open markets, and predictable trade, the message lands simply: calm has returned, at least for now. And as the sun sets over the Potomac, the Treasury building glows in the last light, a symbol perhaps of fragile stability in uncertain times. Because in Washington, peace, even economic peace, is never permanent. It must be managed, maintained, and communicated. And today, at least, Scott Bessent has done just that.